100 Thieves, contenders or pretenders? We'll answer that question. Cloud and NRG still struggling, not really looking the best, as we're more than halfway through the split. And some people are saying, is this the best LCS split ever? Episode 152 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. Want to kick things off by giving everybody a massive, massive thank you and shout out to everybody who was sending me nice messages, posted very positive comments in the YouTube channel. People worrying about Blue Jay and hoping that he's okay. I can safely tell everyone he's doing fine. He wasn't able to respond to any of the comments this week, but he read them all. He's very appreciative, and I'm very appreciative. It was a little nerve-wracking doing the solo episode last week, but I feel like I got into my groove and I feel a lot more comfortable now, so I think everything's going to go smoothly. So once again, thank you to everybody who left a comment on the YouTube channel, who reached out to me on Discord, or even the people who are in our Discord server also posting some very nice things. So thank you once again. Really appreciate it. And while the LCS is taking a 2-week break, I'm thinking I'm probably going to do another episode next week. Not too sure about the week after, but obviously once the LCS picks up again in week 5, we'll be jumping right back on the train. So potentially going to do some episodes during the break, but not exactly sure as of yet. But let's get into the LCS. 2-week break, unfortunate with the timing of everything, just because it feels like we're kind of hitting our stride of spring split and things are really getting very excited. I think nobody expected to be where we are right now in terms of the standings of the league. If you were to tell me that Cloud9 was going to be tied for 4th place in the standings with NRG, the former LCS champions, defending champions, I think everybody would would think you were a liar, or something would have gone horribly wrong. But not necessarily super surprising that FlyQuest is near the top of the table. Well, they're at the top of the table with 7-2, but 100 Thieves right behind them with a 6-3 record. I think they are definitely the story of spring 2024, and I think they're the team that's making this LCS split something to get really excited about. And it's not only just at the top of the standings, the bottom of the standings are also quite competitive and quite contested. Now, I think it's, when we do talk about the removal of 2 of the teams from LCS, I think this is definitely one of the more positive things that we are seeing, which is more parity within the league and a more competitive standings from top to bottom, because typically we would normally see one or two teams be way ahead at the top or way behind at the bottom. So the fact that the field is still all, only 4 wins apart from each other, there being 9 games, very exciting. So I think we'll kick it off at the top of the standings with FlyQuest. We'll bring up their logo this time, as I forgot to last time, but felt like a very trivial week for FlyQuest. They played Shopify Rebellion and Immortals, and I guess people might be surprised when I say it was a very trivial week from them, considering that they should have been the massive favorites in both of those games and dropped one of those games to Shopify. I think the main thing you got to consider was the point that I was kind of making 2 weeks ago, which was I was concerned for the FlyQuest bot lane, and if at any point during the spring or summer splits, if they were going to hold the team back. And I think that was kind of what we saw in that first game against Shopify Rebellion. That was like exhibit A of what could go wrong with this team when we see the bot lane struggle. And I've made my thoughts very clear on how good I think B-Boy is. And B-Boy and Zazel really took it to Masu and Busio in that game. Got a couple solo kills. Zazel was kind of getting the last hits with Ignite and whatnot. But I just thought that the FlyQuest bot lane really struggled against a very good bot lane of B-Boy and Zazel. And you kind of saw within that first game, nothing was really going that poorly for FlyQuest around the other parts of the map. Mid lane was skewing towards Insanity's favor over Jensen, but for the most part, the game really started to get out of control on the FlyQuest perspective from bot lane. And you see the one chance that FlyQuest had in the game was that topside play that they made. They slightly fumbled the dive. I think initially it was a 2-for-1 for FlyQuest at the beginning of it, but Boogie was soloing Drag at the time, made his way from bot lane to top lane during the whole extended top lane team fight that was going on, and cleaned it up at the end, and that really kind of put the nail in the coffin for FlyQuest in that game. But despite the loss to Shopify Rebellion, I'm not that concerned about this FlyQuest team. Yes, I'm still obviously concerned about the bot lane and how they could potentially hold the team back, but I do think that they will continue to improve. Like I mentioned, this is Busio's second year in the LCS, still a very young player, playing with a rookie in Masu, this being his first split in LCS. And I was expecting this team, anyways, to be more of a summer split team than a spring split team. But to see that sort of ugly side of FlyQuest rear its head in this game against Shopify is something to be slightly concerned about moving forward. However, I do believe that the strength of this roster, the strength being the top side of Bwipo, Inspired, and Jensen, are going to be able to cover up some of those holes. And I think it'll become clear towards the end of the season and the beginning of playoffs if the bot lane is going to continue to be a problem, because even for the most part, this split, bot lane has been completely fine. The two games that they've lost, one of them was the bot lane's fault, unfortunately, and the other game was the game against Cloud9, and that was much earlier on in the split, so not necessarily a surprising game to see them lose. So steady is the course for FlyQuest during this split. It was probably a week they expected to pick up 2 wins, but they looked really good also in that Immortals game. Bot lane, if you want to talk about the reverse of what happened in the Shopify Rebellion game, the reverse happened in FlyQuest's favor this time, where bot lane just completely took over the game, was zoning tactical playing the AD Twisted Fate. That was a pretty surprising pick, honestly. People were saying that we might get some Twisted Fate after the buffs in 14.3, as he's been a very strong champion on that patch, but the fact that it debuted in bot lane, I think, was the most surprising part of it, because it's traditionally a mid laner and even has seen some play top lane, which I think we saw on the LEC this weekend. I haven't been watching a ton of LEC, but I know that it did get picked top, I'm pretty sure. Maybe it was Broken Blade. I'm not exactly sure, but I think they were doing the Static Shiv build, which is the same build that Tactical did. But once he got, they pulled up the CS at one point, and it was, I think, 24 for the Callista and 1 CS for the Twisted Fate. He got zoned off multiple waves. He was level 1 when the enemy bot lane was almost level 3. Pretty much the entirety of the game, FlyQuest's bot lane was playing in a 2v3, because so often they would either get the push in the lane or they would freeze the lane, to where Immortals was forced to bring down Armeo, and they were winning almost 2 versus 3. So just kind of funny how the two games were kind of complete opposites of each other, specifically from the bot side perspective. And yeah, trivial 2 or 1-1 week for FlyQuest. Should have been a 2-0 probably on paper. I think, if we do want to, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but if you want to, if you want to do a little bit of mini outlook towards the end of the regular season, the fact that they dropped that one game to Shopify, I think, could potentially haunt them come the end of the regular season, and any potential tiebreaker implications, as they're only 1 win ahead of 100 Thieves, only 2 wins ahead of Team Liquid, and probably the best part about it is them being 3 wins ahead of both Cloud9 and NRG. I think that more likely than not, this team will probably end the regular season in first place, mostly because the quote-unquote stronger, or I guess this year the supposed stronger teams of Cloud9 and NRG are 3 wins behind them. But the fact that 100 Thieves continues on this trajectory that they've been on, they're not too far behind. And, while Team Liquid can be shaky at points, we also seen what that team can look like when they're playing well. So this one game could come to haunt them. But good for FlyQuest. They're going to be good. Not too much to worry about with this team. Now, before I forget, because I forgot in our last episode, and Blue Jay gave me a bit of shit for it, the best thing that you can do to support this podcast right now is to drop a like on the video, leave a comment, join our Discord server if you're listening on the audio platforms. Just keep coming back every week. Maybe join the Discord server. We're usually interacting in there whenever we can. People come in to like to ask questions. Leave a supportive comment. A lot of people did when I was doing the solo episode. Once again, appreciate you. And we're available on pretty much every single major podcasting platform, being Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Twitch. We're everywhere. Follow us. You'll be in the know when episodes are coming. And Discord is the best place for that, for sure. Next up, though, 100 Thieves. What I would say the big surprise of the LCS in 2024 is this young rookie squad of 100 Thieves showing up in the spring split. I think I posed the question. It was either at the end of week 1 or week 2. And I was ready to say that this split was a success for 100 Thieves, regardless of how the remainder of the split played out. Now, the split has continued to play out, and they're just getting better and better. They're 4-1 over their last 5 games, including the Super Week of last week and this past week, sitting at 6-3 in the standings, taking wins over both Team Liquid and Cloud9 this past week. And I think that's the most surprising part is they're getting better and better. And they're beating, the better teams in the LCS. And when you beat the better teams in the LCS, that kind of by default makes you one of the better teams. If you're consistently beating the best teams in the LCS, I feel like that then makes you one of the best teams in the LCS. So the fact that they're able to take down both Team Liquid and Cloud9, and for the most part, I think looked really, really good. A lot of people are going to look at that Cloud9 game and maybe chalk it up to it being a banger or a fiesta, whatever word you might want to use, or a messy game, and not necessarily give 100 Thieves the credit where they deserve, because the only reason that Cloud9 was able to mount any sort of comeback in that game, it was off 100 Thieves' mistakes. And pretty simple mistakes, if you're being honest. If Meech flashes those two Bard ults that gets thrown at him over the walls, the first one being on the opposite side of the Baron pit, and the second one being near, I think it was a Grpahic, can't remember which one it was, but it was 20, 25 minutes into the game. If he flashes either or both of those Bard ultimates, Cloud9 can't win those fights. And Cloud9 at that point in the game, before the sort of failed comeback happened, 100 Thieves was up 5,000 gold into the game. The only reason that Cloud9 was able to get back into the game was because Meech just simply didn't use his flash. I feel like one of my biggest pet peeves, and I feel like it's kind of become a pretty common occurrence in League nowadays with a lot of people, is just not flashing important skill shots or important, important spells that are being thrown your way. Like, I don't know if it's just because League of Legends has devolved into just so much chaos and team fighting that you feel like you need to keep your flash. So like, you just think, oh, I can tank this ult because then I can just flash out, or I can tank this ult, and if I'm able to get out and save my flash for the next fight, that's going to be so much more important. But I feel like more often than not, you just see like players and teams losing games or losing advantageous game states because that certain player is not flashing. So I think if Meech flashes any of those two Varus or Bard ults when he was playing Varus, Cloud9 probably doesn't even get in a position to come back and almost win the game. But even when Cloud9 was coming back and honestly probably should have won that game, 100 Thieves didn't flinch at the opportunities when Cloud9 presented them with mistakes. There was I think pretty much kicked off with the top lane team fight that went on where they were able to get a pick early on onto Blabber. Felt like Blabber was making a lot of mistakes, just being too far forward, and maybe that was a little bit of a symptom of kind of the momentum of the game. When you have the momentum in the game, you feel like you're stronger than your opponent. You want to walk up into their faces, try to make them retreat, and 100 Thieves just wasn't having any of it. Pulled the trigger whenever needed, and I think that was something that we were seeing early on in the split. That was a point to, like about this team. It's no secret that this is the bloodiest team in the LCS. They've even threw up a graphic. It was showing kills per minute across the LCS teams. They were at the top. And then there was also an asterisk saying that it was the highest in all major regions. Pretty surprising considering that the LPL obviously exists, and everyone has known that the LPL is like the bloodiest, most competitive and bloodthirsty league in the world. And the fact that they're averaging more kills than some of the top LPL teams is, I don't know if we want to call it strictly a good thing, but it's definitely a good thing for a new and emerging team. Like I said, you would not think that this is a team filled with two pure rookies, another player in Quid, who is only in his second split ever in LCS, who was a young Korean player who came over to NA for the first time in summer 2023, and a support who, let's be honest, was a bit of a letdown in 2023, both on, initially on FlyQuest, and then maybe he wasn't a letdown on Evil Geniuses, because I think he was doing all right. He was doing what he could on Evil Geniuses. There wasn't a whole lot that the team was going to accomplish after gutting their whole roster, but wasn't necessarily the greatest performer in his FlyQuest days when I think there were more eyes on him. But ever since coming to 100 Thieves, I think him and Meech have paired up to be a really strong bot lane. And, the man to talk about on this team is River, because River is probably the favorite for MVP if you had to pick one. I know there hasn't really been a whole lot of MVP talk, but we're already 2/3 of the way through the split. So if I had to make a guess, it would probably be River for MVP at this point. I mean, maybe he's a bit mad about the whole last split MVP situation and Blabber getting it over him, when many people thought that River should be the one to get MVP. And honestly, he was deserving to win that MVP. It wasn't surprising to me that Blabber didn't end up getting it, but if River would have won it, I wouldn't have been surprised. And he's on a mission, I think, to get it this time, because it's just, I think it's like what I said last week. It's just the the best version of Golden Guardians River is what we're seeing on this 100 Thieves squad. Really strong on all the engaged champions. I mean, that's pretty much what he's playing exclusively. We're not really seeing him play too much of the more supportive styles. Not really as much of the Sejuani, the Ivern type of, tank utility base. We're seeing him mostly on engaged stuff, like a Rel, like a Xin Zhao, like a Vi. Vi seems extremely strong on this patch right now, especially with the Talia, after Talia got a bunch of buffs. So honestly, if I was 100 Thieves, if there wasn't this 2-week break, I would be playing as much Talia Vi as I possibly could on this patch, because I'm pretty sure that champion is going to get nerfed in the coming patches. Maybe that's not going to be the next one. Maybe it'll be the one after. But the Talia Vi combo of old, which is, kind of was the combo when Vi was popping up initially way back at the beginning of last year, looking really, really good once again. So I have nothing but good words to say about 100 Thieves. I guess only really player I haven't talked about, but I have talked about tons in the past, is Sniper. This dude looks like an LCS veteran. He's out here solo killing some of the best tops in the league in Fudge and Impact this week. Straight solo kills, like no assists, no jungle pressure whatsoever. I think in the one against Team Liquid, it was just post level 6. Same with the one against Cloud9, post level 6, all in, gets the kill. Is really taking control of a lot of the lanes that he's playing. He's really only lost 1 or 2 lanes the entire split, which was his first game against Cloud9, which is where he was playing Gwen versus Udyr, and then he had his Riven game. But the Riven game, I purely just chalk up to, first game on stage, nerves and whatnot. So the fact that this guy is playing consistently like one of the best tops in the league through his first 9 games of his LCS career is just something to behold. He's just really, really good. I think this could be the next great North American player. Maybe it's a bit too early to say that, but from everything that I've seen so far, it's hard to not say those things, Oh yeah, and I guess the last thing that I have to say is, obviously it was a pretty close game. They played up against Team Liquid. It was another one of those somewhat chaotic games, but they thrive in the chaos. I mean, great Baron call that they made to sort of sneak Baron at around 23 minutes, which really broke open the game for them. That is not a call that you really see from a lot of these more inexperienced teams, and sometimes, what's the word? What's the right word I'm looking for here? I wouldn't say bad teams, because 100 Thieves is obviously not a bad team, but when you think of some of the weaker teams in LCS, it seems to be that they always struggle around major objectives, whether or not they know when to hit it, when we're going to turn, when we're going to finish. And like I said, 100 Thieves just seems to have the idea of knowing when to pull the trigger on these types of calls and go for the Baron at 23 minutes. Sniper kind of comedically died during the whole Baron with it being at 5k HP, and it looked like River was going to die, but they got the kill on it, and that's really what broke open the game for them against Team Liquid. And yeah, looking really good. Next up, we do have Team Liquid. Speaking of them, the positioning continues to be the downfall of this team. In that game against 100 Thieves, the overextension by both Yon and APA on multiple occasions was the reason that they lost this game. The first one being, I think it was around 17, 18 minutes when Team Liquid seemed to really start to take control of the map. And it wasn't like they had massive control of the map, but they were the ones who were getting pushed in the side lanes and getting pushed in mid lane. And this one instance where Yon just kind of steps up on the Kalista into Varus's face after pushing the wave, gets Varus ulted, has to burn cleanse and flash, still ends up dying. And similar to that, I think it was another 10 minutes later, maybe it was 15 minutes later, around, I think 30 minutes it was, maybe it was slightly before that. But APA just kind of got caught by a rogue Varus ulti, not standing behind his front line, didn't have flash, don't know why he's doing that thing, gets caught by the Varus ult, has to Zhonya's, dies coming out of the Zhonya's from a great quid, knockback on the Talia EW. And yeah, I didn't talk enough about Quid, I think, in the last segment. Quid playing very well as well. He won Player of the Week, but APA died to that combo, and I think that was the game-losing team fight. That was somewhere around like 30 minutes-ish. But feels like I'm a broken record with this Team Liquid squad. The positioning and the mistakes that APA and Yon continue to make are really only the reason why this team isn't succeeding. It feels like when Team Liquid is able to control the pace of the game, when they have the slight gold advantages, when they have control of the map, they know what to do. For the most part, in the macro game I'm talking about, obviously there's still some small individual mistakes that happen, which end up being the pitfall of this team. But for the most part, this team does a very, very good job when ahead and when in positions of strength. the problem is when the game gets chaotic and when AP and Yan are asked to do the carrying and the heavy lifting and kind of, find or maybe find their way out of a situation where they got to solve a bit of a puzzle to see like, okay, I'm the strong guy. This is what I need to do to how to win these fights. They just simply aren't doing it. And I just thought that game against 100 Thieves was very, very telling of the struggles of this Team Liquid squad with the positioning errors of Yan and APA. And when the game just gets chaotic, it just doesn't seem that Team Liquid is very decisive with their calls. And I don't know how much of that has to do with, the communication going on in the team. I know, or I should say we all know that it seems that they've sort of switched to more of an English base speaking than Korean. Now, I'm sure that there's probably some communication that goes on in Korean during the game, especially with the trio of Impact, Umti, and CoreJJ, just because that's their native language. They're probably in situations where it's just them talking and they want to articulate and quickly get out their thoughts in the moment. But it would not surprise me if there was still some potential slight communication issues on the team, and that's probably just going to be a byproduct of the direction that Team Liquid seems to have taken their team, which is, the Korean base with the young NA talent. So yeah, I don't know. Similar to last week, it just feels like I can't necessarily trust this team. It feels like I just can't come out and say that Team Liquid's a very good team. I have confidence in them moving forward. They're going to beat this team because I feel like this team can lose to any team. You know, mistakes are not uncommon for this team, and you just can't make these simple mistakes against any team in the LCS right now. The LCS is as competitive as we've ever seen it. Anyone can beat everyone, it feels like. So when you are making these mistakes, maybe in the past, lesser competition aren't going to punish you for those, and you're still going to continue to win those games that maybe you should be losing. Well, guess what? Now you're losing those games. And I feel like similar to what I said last week, Team Liquid is still just going to roam in the middle of the pack here, and they're not going to break into the top two unless they can find good, consistent performances from their carries. And until I get to see that, I can't really give TL the benefit of the doubt. Because sometimes you do give the benefit of the doubt to some of the better teams that we've seen historically. Once they can clean up their issues, we know they're going to be good. Formerly, way back in the day with TSM, they were always the type of team that didn't necessarily look the best in the regular season, but you had confidence that they were going to improve towards the end. And once playoffs started, you knew you were going to get a TSM at 100%. Feels like we kind of get that vibe with Cloud9 sometimes these days. Don't necessarily always look the greatest in the regular season, but usually towards the end of it, plus the beginning of playoffs, you know that this team is on, and we just need to see that from Team Liquid. It's non-existent at the moment. Next up, we got Cloud9. They're 4-5 now, tied at 4th. Went 1-1 on the week. Still slightly concerned, honestly, with this team. I think that obviously before the Super Week, everybody kind of chalked up the loss to Shopify as some experimentation. Not necessarily a big reason to get concerned for this team because they still have very strong individual players and they're going to figure it out at some point. And now obviously the Super Week happened. They go 0-3. Now we get to, there's a little bit to be concerned about. And I think going into this week, I just wanted to see some more consistent gameplay from Cloud9, maybe some more, I feel like easy to play is not the correct word to use, but some more easy to play type of team comps. I mean, more specifically where you don't have one specific way in order to win the game, where you can have multiple ways. Multiple roles can carry, multiple roles can do these various things. It's not all reliant on a specific situation going in their favor and getting the correct setup, kind of just a generic good team fight team. And I think we kind of saw that in the NRG game. While it was still a very close and bloody game in the early game, no surprising to Cloud9 as they're one of the bloodiest teams in the league, especially ever since the days of Blabber, as we know. But it's clear that this team is obviously not stupid because they had a really good Baron call in the game against NRG, where they recognized they saw 3 people of NRG on the blue part of the red side jungle, where obviously NRG was playing on blue side. So Cloud9 just kind of recognized like, hey, there's 3 guys on the opposite side of the map, including the jungler. Let's go do the Baron. And it was obvious that it was a good Baron call because they had vision on 3 people on that side of the map. So it's obvious that this team isn't dumb. They know how to play the game, but I just think that the problem is they continue to pick these champions in these style of fights where they're forced into either winning the early game or getting a proper team fight set up in order to win the game. I just think that you can play so many different things that aren't these skirmish heavy engage, these skirmish heavy wanting to fight top laners, the melee mid lane assassins. I guess even in this game against 100 Thieves I'm talking about now, it's just more about the style of game that they're playing as opposed to how they're actually playing it. Because in that game against 100 Thieves, you saw once Cloud9 was able to get one foot in the door with how they wanted to fight, they were able to sort of figure out, and that's sort of when they were able to mount that comeback. But like I said, it was kind of just off the back of mistakes from 100 Thieves, not necessarily Cloud9 doing the right things. But even past those two not even fail flashes, lack thereof fail flashing from Meech, once Cloud9 wasn't able to start the fight in an advantageous position, that being somebody getting picked off, somebody getting a good flank, and the teams were kind of just butting heads in the 5v5, you saw that Cloud9's team comp could not do a single thing to 100 Thieves comp. Akali could never walk up to try to engage or start a fight with her own kit, as Talia would just throw out the E to stun him and get one shot. Literally happened on 4 or 5 occasions in that team fight, or in that game, in various team fights, where Jojo would try and approach anybody on NRG, and he would literally just get one shot, even through the shroud, none of the vision whatsoever. He would just die. And same thing with Fudge. Whenever he wasn't able to join or start the fight from like a flanking or sort of an off angle, anytime he had to run in face first, he would just get focused and insta die. And the whole game was on Berserker to carry, and he almost did it. He obviously got the pentakill at one point in the game. A bit later in the game, there was that moment where he was fighting 2 versus 4 against the majority of 100 Thieves, while Fudge was pushing the mid lane inhibitor, where he almost got the sort of like the collateral pentakill, where he had pressed E on the Zeri and was hitting through 4 people at the same time. They all escaped with 1 HP. That might have been like the craziest. That might have been as crazy as the Danny play from spring finals, or was it even finals? I think it was 3rd place match from the Danny moment from spring finals that long ago. It was almost as good as that. I think it would have been just as hype of that. Obviously not as hype in the moment, it being playoffs or the series before finals, but really, really sick play. Almost won Cloud in the game right there. But Cloud9 just continued to make these small errors throughout the game that just ended up costing them. And when they continue to make this sort of medley of tiny errors, they just don't have the fallback of a good team comp in order to bring them back into the game. And I just want to see Cloud9 pick something different. Pick different things. Don't always have the game be on Berserker to win it if you're not ahead, because that's what it feels like. Whenever Cloud9 picks a team comp and they're not ahead, more often than not, it's just going to be on Berserker to win the game. And you saw him trying. There was various times where he's dashing into 100 Thieves members' faces 2v3 or 2v4 or 1v4. And, he's trying to go for those, more risky plays because he feels like he has to. And I don't blame Berserker for that. I blame the rest of the team for putting him in a position to have to do that, because kind of once the game really started to devolve into chaos, this was at like the 35 plus minute mark after the pentakill, then almost second pentakill happened. There was 2 separate occasions where Berserker is trying to do as much as he can in the fight, flashing forward to try to continue the fight, to keep his ult up, try to kill more 100 Thieves members. And he had to spend the last 10 minutes of the game without any flash. And the one time that 100 Thieves was able to get on top of him, Sniper specifically, they wiped him and they ended the game. So I feel like C9 just needs to get back to basics, because they're shooting themselves in the foot. They're a good team. They're going to be a good team. Let's get some momentum going. Pick some easy stuff. Next up, we got NRG. Tied with Cloud9 at the 4-5 mark, and they went 0-2 this week. I think not necessarily something that people were expecting. They were playing Cloud9, so some people kind of thought that there was obviously probably about a 50-50 chance that they would win or lose that game, but the fact that they lost against Dignitas was very surprising, mostly because I thought that NRG just had no respect for Dignitas whatsoever. On multiple occasions, their bot lane tried to contest 2 versus 3 in their own jungle when the enemy bot lane had to push. That happened on 2 separate occasions where a member of the NRG bot lane died. There was a team fight around Rift Herald where NRG actually started the fight using 2 ultimates to kill Dove, and then proceeded to then take another, and I should say the 2 ultimates were 2 of the most important ultimates in team fighting, that being the Nocturne ult and their Leona ult. They then tried to take another fight directly after that 4 versus 4 when they didn't have major cooldowns up. They had blown, I think Leona had flashed, Nocturne ulted over the wall, and Leona ulted over the wall. And then they lost that team fight. And then simply after that, like directly after that, Contracts walks up into the river when the team doesn't have mid control, and he dies. And I don't know if they lost the dragon, but they just continue to slip further and further behind in the game. Kind of similar to what I was talking about with Cloud9. It's just these small mistakes that NRG is making that are piling up to where they get to a point where they're down 3, 4, 5,000 gold, and there's not a whole lot that they can do to get back into the game. It felt really weird seeing the Zac top lane in that game, a top laner who wants to be team fighting, as he's a sort of tank utility type of champion that thrives in team fighting as opposed to side laning 1v1 against a bruiser duelist tank, style of champion on the opposite side. He had not been in a team fight. He was sitting at 0-0-0 at 23 minutes before he TP'd into a team fight, and that was his first time being basically involved in the entire game. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why we're picking Zac top lane as NRG if we're not going to have him involved in the fights or even play around him at all until 23 to 24 minutes, because you might as well just be playing a split push champion at that point. NRG made no effort to try to fight around or with Dokla. More often than not, he was actually in a side lane, and NRG was then forcing fights when he didn't have TP. I think was the Rift Herald fight where they went 4v4 after they killed Dove. Dokla was in the side lane, and Rich had based and just straight walked up to Rift Herald. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense what NRG's game plan was in that game, as they just disrespected Dig the entire time, trying to contest when they didn't have the manpower or resources, and didn't want to seemingly start a team fight with their team fighting champion that they picked. Obviously, the other game against Cloud9, it was kind of just a tragic game from start to finish. Obviously, it started off with that botched bot lane dive where NRG, I think they went 1 for 3 or 1 for 2 on that initial bot lane dive where they're trying to use the power of, was it Kalista they were playing, or were they playing Senna TK? I gotta pull it up again. Yeah, no, they were playing the Senna TK. Wanted to use the early power, push on that, bringing over Contracts. Failed the dive, unfortunately, resulted in a big swing for Cloud9 in the early game. And NRG did a good job fighting back in the mid game. They obviously had a very strong mid game team with the Vi, Talia, Senna, Tom, Kench. Like, that's kind of a dream mid game spiking team if I've ever seen one. But once it went past 20 minutes, and especially when NRG made the mistake of showing 3 bot side when Cloud9 had mid control and they just went to Baron, that was just sort of the nail in the coffin there. But yeah, not necessarily concerning with the Cloud9 game, just because I think they ran into Cloud9 at a bad time when Cloud9 realized, hey, they need to step their shit up and win a game. But the fact that they lost that game against Dignitas and all the mistakes that they were making is definitely something to be concerned about, because the former LCS champions should not be losing to Dignitas in 2024. Now, speaking of Dignitas, they're also 4-5. They had a 2-0 week, kind of clawing their way up from the bottom of the standings. And man, they looked really good. It felt like everything that I said that I wanted to see out of Dignitas for the rest of the season, that's just exactly what they did. They stuck Isles on some engaging champions. XU continued to be on those engaging champions. I know we did play the Ivern one game, but Ivern's kind of like an engaged sort of champion. You engage with your body, or Daisy, or you kind of you have your Q obviously to engage as well, but somewhat fits the bill of an engaged champion. I'll take what I can get here. I know it's not a 1-to-1 thing, but come on, give it to me. Yeah, I thought the improvements that they made from last week to this week were really, really good. Isles on engaged champions was the number one thing that I wanted to see. I thought he had a really good Recon game against Immortals. I thought he was a big reason why they were able to sort of scrap out of that deficit that they were in that Immortals game on multiple occasions. Had really impactful flash WRs on Recon to get people on the back line. Made the game-winning play where they killed Tactical in that top lane fight after Immortals kind of overextended themselves trying to pick off Dove in the sideline. Dignitas then collapsed on them with Isles getting a really nice W flash R onto tactical. He died. Dig took the Baron and kind of just snowballed the game from out of there. Um, and to that game against NRG, I mean, yes, NRG was making mistakes when they were fighting when they weren't supposed to or didn't have the manpower or the resources to do so. But something that me and Blue Jay have always said is, yeah, the enemy team can make mistakes, but you have to be the ones to punish those mistakes. And Dig was doing a really good job at doing that. And I think that's the best thing that you can see from another. They're not a young team, but they're one of the more veteran teams. Maybe you can classify them as struggling because they're not struggling this week, obviously, because they went 2-0, but they weren't. They were struggling at the beginning of the split. So the fact that they're able to maybe fix some of those mistakes, get Isles on a better style of champion for the functionality of the team. Because like I mentioned, Rich, still a strong carry, Dove, a really strong carry, and Tomo still is looking very, very solid. Obviously, we saw Tomo on the Smolder with the first Smolder game in League of Legends history, obviously being the benefits of playing on the live patch and whatnot. Don't know what to think about Smolder yet. It seems like a strong champion. I was surprised to hear that, specifically on the co-streams I'm talking about, I was surprised to hear that both Sneaky and Doublelift view Smolder as a strong early game champion, weak mid game, then very strong late game. Because to me, it felt like his early game wasn't very good. And I mean, that's just, my opinions are purely just on playing with and against the champion in solo queue and whatnot, or in just normal games. Like, it's not any deep analysis or whatnot, but I was surprised to hear them say that they think he's a strong laner, but weak in mid game and strong late game, because I feel like it would just follow the typical sort of graph of a scaling champion where you're weak early, you're getting a bit stronger in mid lane, and then you're really strong late game. So the fact that he's a strong early game champion, people seem to think is definitely going to make him very pro play viable. I initially wasn't thinking that he was going to be very pro play viable just because I didn't think his early game was that strong. But if the pros seem to think that he's a strong early game champion, that's definitely going to mean that we're going to see it get picked. Got picked 3 times, I believe, in LCS this past weekend. So we're definitely going to see some more of it, especially if it gets any changes to the kit. And I guess we'll have to see. I mean, if it gets buffed, then we'll definitely see it. If it has to get nerfed, then we're also definitely going to see it, because if it's good enough to get nerfed, then it's getting played. So I see a Smolder in the near future for the LCS, and a lot of it. Oh yeah, I guess last thing I have to say on Dignitas, XU, like if River wasn't such a god this split, I feel like XU's been not too far behind him in terms of one of the better junglers this year. Don't know if it's a byproduct of him sort of shining on a lesser team as opposed to, a guy like Inspired, who doesn't necessarily need to play super, super well in order for FlyQuest to win games. But it really feels like when XU is going and gets his really nice engages and the team is playing well around him, feels like this team is really, really good. And XU, I think, is another sort of pleasant surprise to the LCS, similar to Sniper. Obviously, XU didn't have the name behind him like Sniper did, but he was a guy that's been in top academy/challenger league teams for a while now. Played a couple of games of LCS over the course of the last year and a half, but he seems to really be finding his place on Dignitas. Looks really good, and I think similar to Sniper, he's got a bright future ahead of him as well. Next up, we got Shopify Rebellion, and similar to Dignitas, they seem to also be listening to me in my comments last week, because we saw some normal picks out of Insanity, and I think something that was needed, mostly because I just thought that things were getting a bit too wild on the Shopify Rebellion draft meetings, just because of the number of unique champions that he had played over the course of 7 games. I believe it was 6 unique champs over 7 games with 2 Scion games, but I was very happy to see him stuck on Orianna for 2 games in a row, because honestly, even in the loss in their first game against, in the second game against Team Liquid, didn't even look that bad on the Orianna, but despite Insanity being on some more stable mid lane champions, Bvoy is still the reason why this team is looking, I don't know, I wouldn't even say they're looking good, but the reason why this team is looking good at all is mostly because of Bvoy. I mean, this guy is a beast. He feels like Berserker when Berserker joined the LCS. Everybody knew that Berserker, when he was joining the LCS, that he was from T1, and that everyone knew he was going to be pretty good, but we didn't know that he was going to be this good. And I feel like Bvoy is kind of like the lesser of that, where people knew that he was, people he didn't have the name value that Berserker did, but people assumed that he was going to come in and be a solid AD carry. Obviously, has good mechanics. He's played in other major regions before. Wasn't going to just come up and be some slouch. But I don't think that people were expecting him to be such a strong laner and a strong player. Despite the not so great record of Shopify sitting at 3-6, when he's been in the lineup, the team has been 3-4. And in some of those games, they've lost because they've maybe gotten a bit too kooky in the mid lane. But the fact that B-Voy still continues to perform like a beast, and Boogie, finally, we saw the Boogie that I've been talking about, it feels like, for the last 4 weeks. We have yet to see Boogie perform like he did for a lot of 2023, and we saw the Wukong pick against FlyQuest. Oh my god, that Wukong game was insane. It was the perfect, I thought it was a really good spot to pick Wukong also, considering that FlyQuest had, well, you knew that they were going to pick Cassante or some form of tank top lane in the top lane, because they picked it on, they were blue side, so they picked it 4-5. You knew that they were going to pick a melee tank top side. Ended up being the Cassante, which is even better for the Wukong. They had, I think they were enemy Inspired was playing Vi or something like that. He was playing a melee, and then they had bot lane playing Blitzcrank. And obviously Wukong is a really good pick into Blitzcrank because you can clone the Ws. You're basically never allowed to get hooked as long as you have the clone. And you really saw the strength of Wukong when you're able to put him in a good situation where the enemy team, it's sort of advantageous for you that you're going to be fighting for a long period of time because they have a bunch of melees. You can stay in the fight. You're getting a lot of usage out of the passive. Triumph plus Conquer and all of that. That was on full display on that top side fight where FlyQuest initially started it when Boogie was soloing the dragon all the way on the opposite side of the map, sprints it up when the whole dive is going on, and then cleans up for basically a quadra kill. I know it was only a triple kill, but led to 4 kills for Shopify Rebellion, and was the reason that they won that game. The strong play out of B-Voy and the savior of Boogie in that topside play was the sole reason that Shopify ended up winning that game. So I think that we need to continue to see this improved Boogie. Keep B-Voy on these strong carries. Zeyzal, give him, and all Zeyzal needs to do is to make sure B-Voy doesn't die. Doesn't matter what it is. You're playing a melee engager, peel for B-Voy. You're playing the Enchanter, all your spells used to peel B-Voy. Peel this guy at all costs. I feel like they need to embrace the style of play which Cloud9 sort of adopted when Berserker was 1v9 in the league. The style of play that Team Liquid was doing when they initially debuted Tactical on their roster in summer season 10. Like, the game is going to become about B-Voy. We need to do everything we can to put the eggs in the B-Voy basket and pray that he carries us, because I have confidence that B-Voy can carry. Like, here's what I'll say. If you put B-Voy on Team Liquid, oh my god, that team would be unreal, I think. I think you put B-Voy on Team Liquid, and that team goes from, like, they're for sure in the top 2. For sure. What else did I have here? Oh, yeah. Obviously, they lost that game against Team Liquid, unfortunately, but didn't mind the fact that they tried to go for that sort of Baron flip, if you want to even call it a flip, where they're down 5,000 gold and just decide, hey, we need to go Baron. We're either going to hopefully get the Baron just by doing it, or we're going to try to force a fight and do it. Mostly because they knew that they were getting outscaled. The enemy team had, I believe they had Senna and Aurelion Sol. So you kind of just knew that, and they recognized themselves that they were going to get outscaled. So don't mind at all that they went for this Baron flip. Like I said, flip if you want to call it, but might have looked into people because, like, well, why are you doing Baron down 5,000 gold when the enemy team is right in front of your face? It's because you know that you're losing the scaling battle, and the longer that this game goes on, the more difficult it's going to become to get back into the game. And something like that, where a team knows and identifies, hey, what's the game state? Does that mean it's good for us or bad for us? Oh, it's not good for us? Well, is it going to get it worse? Okay, well, if it's going to get it worse, then we probably need to fight now as opposed to later. That's a mark of an intelligent team, I think. So while it looked int, still the right call, I think, despite being down 5,000 gold. And 1-1, especially taking down FlyQuest, I think is a good result for Shopify, because it wouldn't have surprised me at all to see them go 0-2. So, very good. Unfortunately, though, we got to talk about Immortals, who went 0-2 on the week. And it's sad because I just spent all of last week's episode on the Immortals section hyping them up, saying that, OMG, this team's looking so good. they're going to make playoffs. And they went 0-2 and lost to Dignitas, one of the teams that they definitely need to beat in order to make playoffs. And the fact that they lost that game when they were honestly in a winning position, dude, that was just such a sad game, because that Immortals versus Dignitas game was Immortals games to lose. They were up 3-0 on drags with control of the game. All of, the reason why they lost that game was because they decided to overextend in the top side of the map, trying to go for a pick on Dove in the side lane while they didn't have their tier 1 tower up. And so as sort of as Immortals is shifting at the top side trying to pick up Dove, Dig recognizes that, hey, we can just follow behind them and kind of hit him with the sandwich. And when Mask and Atra, Mask and Castle didn't instacast their TPs, you kind of knew it was over. Immortals really didn't recognize that they could actually get killed in that situation. They tried to walk it out, but as I mentioned in the Dig section, really good call from Isles to force the engage onto Tactical, whom they probably knew had no flash. Mostly because it was blown in the previous drag fight beforehand, which Immortals had actually, they didn't win, but they did win actually. It was like it was 3 for 2 or whatever it was. That was when they took the Drake just beforehand, and then they sort of had reset and gone for the display. And it just felt like a really weird play to go for when you had just gotten the third drag. You're up 3-0 on drags. You then spend all your vision topside, and then you're going to stick around topside to try to go for a pick, as opposed to getting your vision topside on the Baron pit so you know that they can't Baron, then taking a reset to then set up for your drag fight, because the drag was coming up in 2.5 minutes at that point. And Dragons obviously got to be the priority when you're up 3-0, and I think it was either Ocean or Mountain, can't remember exactly, but it was either Ocean or Mountain, and that's definitely one of the most powerful souls in terms of being able to group up and team fight with, and that's what that whole game was going to be about, was grouping up and team fighting. And I think that Immortals just kind of got their priorities wrong in that game once they were at a even to advantageous state, and basically the decision to go topside there and go for that pick was the reason that they lost that game, because they weren't able to, then were able to get flanked by the Rakan, and it wasn't even a flank really. It was just he just came at them from the side, because obviously all of Immortals is funneling down into the top lane, and Isles just comes out of the enemy or the blue side jungle and just gets the flash Rakan WR, and wasn't really much Tactical could do with no flash up, even though he was able to cleanse the charm. So obviously then they had that game against FlyQuest where they debuted the Twisted Fate, which was the Twisted Fate bot lane. And like I said, pretty surprising to see it go bot lane as opposed to mid or top lane, but felt like Immortals had an incorrect read on how that bot lane was going to go against FlyQuest. Most importantly, because they had Armeo start on the same side as bot lane. He started blue on red side, but then decided to path top side, skipping Gromp, skipping Wolves, going directly top side to farmers topside. And I don't know if they made that decision because they knew that Udyr was going to maybe go for a proxy on the fourth, like one of the waves after the third or the fourth wave. Maybe they knew that Udyr was going to try to proxy the wave, so they wanted jungler to be on the top side in case there was a chance where Castle could either clear the wave or leave the wave and try to get a kill on him. But yeah, they basically just left their bot lane out to hang for the first 3 minutes of the game. And like I said, you saw how Tactical just got zoned completely off, like 3 to 4 waves. Bot lane was level 1 when the enemy bot lane was almost level 3. Was hitting at 1 CS at whatever it was, 3-something minutes, and pretty much had no chance in the game whatsoever. And that was purely because bot lane was just such a disaster where, like I said, you're getting zoned off waves. You're constantly having to bring your jungler down to cover your lane when you're trying to either push it out or to break the enemy freeze. And then you're losing 2v3 fights around bot lane. There was, I think, on multiple occasions, 2 occasions, where Armee was forced to come down into the FlyQuest bot lane, and they either got killed in 2 versus 3s, or they just got, there was just like a neutral 2v3 going on bot lane where the jungler has to show it in order to shove the wave or farm the wave, and that just leaves Inspired to do whatever he wants on the opposite side of the map. And it wasn't like that the game against FlyQuest was just going out of control. FlyQuest was doing, from a macro perspective, FlyQuest was doing everything right. They recognized that they didn't need to force fights. They didn't need to force, these fights around objectives. All they needed to do was, hey, if we know where the enemy jungler is and he's bot side because he has to be bot side because bot lane is just completely fucked, we just get the farm waves, push waves, take objectives, and control the game. And you really saw that. I think normally when you expect to see this top team versus bottom team type of game and one lane is just completely out of the game, you would expect that it would turn into a bloody game because one team is getting desperate and then the other team is just knocking them back. And FlyQuest kind of took the opposite approach where it's just like, hey, we're just going to do the opposite of whatever your jungler is doing. Jungler would show bot side, I'm farming every other camp. Jungler is not showing bot side, well, then now I'm going bot side so we can pressure bot side more to zone them off of more and more waves. And it just felt like Immortals just had the wrong read about how that lane was going to go. To have your jungler path away from the Kalista Renata and not then sort of do the reverse. Because like sometimes you'll see junglers, they'll start a buff, then they'll go to the opposite side buff, and then path back down towards the buff they initially started at because they skipped the Wolves and the Gromp to do the Raptors and the Krugs and then come back and then, fight over bot side or bot side grab, whatever it may be. But like I said, I think it was just purely the wrong read. And I think, unfortunately for Immortals, it cost them a game. And with there being less games and less teams, these types of games that you play where you commit yourself to a specific or wacky strategy, if you want to call it, with some sort of off-meta pick, when those fail, it's going to be even more sort of, what's the word? It's going to be even more punishing because it's 14 games out of 18 games. That's, I don't know what percentage is that, like what that's like 7%. 7% of your whole season now was just kind of a loss because you had the wrong read. And I guess in this shortened season, that's maybe why I'm not as big of a fan of these constant off-meta picks and off-meta strategies. I think there's times for it. I think mostly it's time in best of 5 when you maybe have the luxury of able to drop a game if a certain strategy doesn't work. But in this very shortened season, with it being best of 1, wasn't necessarily the biggest fan. But I can appreciate the I can appreciate the effort. Well, that does it for all the teams and all the games. But I figured we'd answer the question of if this is the best LCS split ever, because I see a lot of people, and I think rightfully so, talking up how great this split has been and how this is one of the best splits of all time. There's so much parity within the league. Everyone can beat everyone. And, people are claiming because of that, that's why it should be declared the best split of all time. And I'm going to push back on that. I should say more specifically, best spring split of all time. Maybe I didn't say that at the beginning. Maybe I did, but just to be specific, the best spring split of all time. And I would probably put it at like number 2. And the reason I say that is because I think people are forgetting a certain split, maybe because people want to forget it, but it was the start of franchising. And for my money, I think the 2018 spring split was the best spring split of all time. And the reason I say that was because if you remember, if we want to take a little trip down memory lane, that was actually the split where Echo Fox started the first round robin of 2020, or oh my god, is it 2020? 2018, they started the first round robin of spring 2018 going 9-0, which was a very big surprise at the time because the Echo Fox roster, if I remember correctly, their roster was Huni, Dardoch, man, I should just pull it up. Yeah, what was the roster? The roster was Huni, Dardoch, Phoenix, Altec, and Adrian. And I think just from the name brand players that I'm saying right there, you would not think that was going to be the best team in the LCS through halfway of the split. That was when you had Cloud9 with Jensen, Svenskeren, Sneaky. You had the new look 100 Thieves at the time, a new team into the LCS, obviously because of franchising, but they had Meteor Sunday, Ryu, Cody-san, Aframu. Obviously, TSM was still TSM at that time, and they had made the big signing of bringing over Sven and Mithy from G2. And obviously, Team Liquid, that was when they basically started spending a shit ton of money on the roster, when they sort of bought out Impact from Cloud9. They brought in Doublelift and Ole after Doublelift had done like a little bit of playing for Team Liquid in Season 7 spring. So I just feel like people maybe forgot about that split because, I mentioned the first half of that split where Echo Fox went 9-0 and was kind of surprising the league. It was then in the second half of the league where 100 Thieves, at the time, the sort of most hype and newest addition to the LCS because of franchising, they then went, I think it was either 9-0 or 8-1. I think it was 8-1 actually, in their second round robin, and ended up tie-breaking Echo Fox for first place And that was obviously the split where Aframu won MVP. 100 Thieves went to finals. Did unfortunately lose in the spring finals 3-0 to Team Liquid. It was actually pretty quick 3-0 and not a very competitive final, but that, for my money, was definitely the best spring split regular season. And I don't even know if people were including regular season, but regular season and playoffs, mostly because it was such a crazy regular season, mostly due to the fact that Echo Fox was on this big hot streak. Then they sort of fell off towards the end, and you had these other teams of, 100 Thieves, TSM, C9. They sort of powered up moving into the playoffs. And obviously, you had Team Liquid. That was the start of their dynasty, if we want to call it, where they won, the 4 championships in a row. That was the start of it. So while maybe the split still has the potential to overtake that one, but still like spring 2018 for my money. All right. Well, next up, we'll get into some game predictions. Let me bring those up. Here we go. First game on Saturday. This is, reminder, there's a 2-week break. So these games actually aren't happening until March. I believe it's March 2nd and March 3rd. So unfortunate. The 2-week break is kind of, I feel like it's breaking the momentum of the split. Just got done talking about how this could be the best spring split ever. The fact that there's now going to be a almost 3-week break. It's only 2 weeks of games, but it's going to feel like 3 weeks because of the weekdays. Just kind of sucks. So first game after the break, FlyQuest versus Cloud9. I think I'm going to have to roll with FlyQuest on this one. I being a C9 fan and, maybe sometimes picking them when the matches are, closer just because of my bias. Really hard to pick against C9 in this situation. It's really difficult to pick for C9 in this situation, considering the struggles that we've been seeing, most specifically out of the solo lanes. And I think the solo lanes of FlyQuest have been the strength of this team for the majority of the split. Bwipo has been really, really solid on the top lane. Not necessarily super flashy in terms of getting massive advantages or, solo kills, and whatnot, and players of the game, but just doing a really, really good job controlling the lane very, very well. And I think that's something that Fudge has really struggled with ever since we've shifted out of this top lane carry-oriented meta. Doesn't seem to be Fudge's cup of tea, playing the macro game, wave control, knowing where to be and when to be at the correct timings. It just seems to be on Bwipo's side for this. Next up, Dignitas versus 100 Thieves. Gonna go with 100 Thieves to keep the streak going, keep that momentum going, and who knows, by the end of the split, they could be in the top 2, top 3. Next up, Team Liquid versus NRG. Now, I feel like NRG, similar to what I was saying with Cloud9 last week, NRG's got to get their shit together at some point. And I feel like this is the week that they got to do it. So I'm going to take NRG over Team Liquid. While maybe that's an upset, who knows, but I like NRG. Last up, IMT versus Shopify. Man, it's tough because I'm rooting for Immortals because I declared that they're going to make playoffs, but I also like Shopify because of Insanity and B-Voy and Boogie being beasts. I'm going to go Shopify. It's hard. This whole thing really blew up in my face with Immortals making playoffs, but I think I got to go Shopify. First game on Sunday, FlyQuest versus 100 Thieves. This might be where the streak ends, unfortunately, for 100 Thieves, because I am going to take FlyQuest. I will take the veterans over this young and up-and-coming roster, unfortunately. Next up, NRG versus IMT. Gonna roll with NRG. That would unfortunately put Immortals 0-2 on this week, and probably could confirm that they're not going to make playoffs if they were to go 0-2 again. So, if anything, Immortals really needs to win that game against Shopify for them to stay in it. Third game on Sunday, Team Liquid versus Cloud9. Gonna roll with Cloud9. I feel like they want to get revenge for giving APA his first win against C9. That was kind of a bit of a meme they were talking about. And APA tweeted out after they beat C9 in the Super Week that it was the first time they had beat C9. So I think Cloud9 is going to want revenge on that, so I'm going to go Cloud9. Next up, Dignitas versus Shopify. I'm going to go with Dig. Like I said, really liked what I saw from Dig in the in the fourth week. I don't know why I said second. This past week, this being the fourth week. Really liked the improvements that they made. Hope to see more of that. Okay. Now we got a little bit of quick news. Very, very small. So I'll go through that really quickly. Number one, It was announced earlier in the week, I guess to say the beginning of last week, that Yamato was no longer going to be the head coach of Karmine Corp over in the LEC. Obviously, there had been a lot of contention within the community surrounding this team at the end of the winter regular season for Europe, mostly because obviously KC underdelivered and there was a lot of blaming thrown around at various players, the coaching staff, and whatnot. So the fact that it seems that they're not making any roster decisions or not making any roster changes, and instead dropping him as the head coach, which seemed to be at the 11th hour, based on the video that he released on his YouTube channel, saying that he was kind of caught off guard by the move and that didn't necessarily see it coming just because how late it had gotten into the off season, quote unquote, if you want to call it that. So yeah, it's unfortunate because he's obviously a really good head coach. He has a really good track record with teams that he's coached for. There's a ton of teams that he's coached for, but the most successful ones being, Vitality, Fnatic previously. Obviously, KC has not been one of the successful coaching tenures of him, but no doubt that he'll find a coaching spot in the future. Interesting enough to hear him say that he would return to KC in the future if the opportunity presented itself. And feels like the org did him a little bit dirty, but I can appreciate his loyalty and willingness to just be on a team and want to win. And I think that's all you can ask for as a head coach or in a head coach is you want to be committed to the team that you're on and you want to win for the team that you're on. And if there's a possibility that he could return as a coach and that's what he wants to do, then obviously mad respect for him. Another thing, last little piece of LEC news here. Finn, he's rejoining the league. Back on Rogue. He's going to replace Shigenda as their top laner. Not a huge surprise there, considering Rogue didn't necessarily have the greatest split, and Shigenda really hasn't been able to fill the hole that Ottawamne left ever since he left the team in 2023. So, yeah. Probably going to be an upgrade for Rogue. Good to see Finn get a spot on a starting team in a major region because he had looked all right, towards the end of his LCS career. I know that the beginning of his LCS career obviously wasn't the start that he was probably looking for when he came over to CLG from Rogue, but really picked it up towards the end of his LCS tenure, and I think was a player that a lot of people were wondering why he wasn't on a starting spot in the LEC. So the fact that he's made his way back there, good thing. That'll be it for the Clown Fiesta Podcast, episode 152. Still probably going to be doing these solo for the time being. I am planning on having some guests at some point, but for anything, if I'm going to be doing episodes during the 2-week break, those are probably going to remain as solo episodes. But once the LCS then resumes the first week of March, that's probably when I'm going to target to have some other people on the show. Once again, appreciate everybody who sent me a bunch of positive messages, whether that's the comments on the YouTube video, Discord, even the people who were in the live chat at the time, giving me some encouragement when I was maybe a little bit nervous, not sure how it was going to go. So feeling a little bit more comfortable. Tried to keep this episode a little bit more concise, although I did have a lot of thoughts that I wanted to get through because I had a lot to write down. But tried to make it a little bit shorter than the previous one, mostly because I don't want to keep you guys for too long hearing me ramble constantly. Because as everyone knows, when Blue Jay was here, we do love a good ramble. We would love to get those episodes under 2 hours for the most part, but we would sometimes go over 2 hours. So with the one-man show, want to try to keep it to around an hour. Feels like a pretty good sweet spot. Obviously, sometimes will be longer. Maybe sometimes it'll be shorter, but I feel like the hour mark is the aim that I'm going to try to go for. Let me know, even honestly, if you would prefer me to ramble and for it to be longer, then I'll do that. But don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with some of these things. So going to close it out here. Thank you so much for watching. This has been episode 152 of the Clown Fiesta Podcast.